So, what I love most about development is design. Well, that's not entirely true. It's actually API design. Because you can pack in your design what your code actually do and what it is actually capable of. So if you actually care about design, you can still ask Tamir. So let's craft SwiftUI component, I hope, the same way Apple does. So I'm Thomas Durand, but I goes with Dean on the social network. Like Greg say, I'm a backend engineer. Yeah, Will. But I'm still doing iOS development, building Padlock and SharePoint. I'm trying to be a speaker, tech blog writer, and I'm mostly Apple enthusiast here with the community, and I'm building ButtonKit. ButtonKit is a small SwiftUI library that supports asynchronous button with this kind of loading. It also supports throwable problems with a little shake animation, and it also supports deterministic loading with a progression. So, what was the biggest challenge building ButtonKit for me? It was actually to make the API feels right, feels SwiftUI capable and easy to use for the developer. For that, I have two advice to give you. First one, try to focus on the call side of your views and components in your code. Look at what feels wrong, try to improve, and then if you're not sure, really try to craft what is a good input and what is a good output of your view and minimize that and comprehend that. So we are going to focus on a sample component that will be about showing rating stars depending on some kind of double rating with 5 stars. And here the API is very easy. It's just one required argument. It's a double. Um, Not a lot to go with that. But let's say you need to have number of stars argument. So you would try maybe to add an optional input argument. And I think it's often the fallback. Like you need a new argument, put one, put a default value, and you're done. But this is not scalable for your component. You will end up having a lot of argument. You will end up to have a specific order for argument, and you can do better. So an approach would be to use what SwiftUI provides with you is environment. An environment will be a value that is provided to your child views, and you don't have to think about it. You can even ignore it. You can build your own using the entry macro on the environment value extension and allowing you to provide a default value and only listen to the actual value when you need it inside of your view with the at environment. With that, you can use this kind of API, but we can still do better and more Swift UI. So you can still also introduce a small helper on the extension of a view that would be a method with the number of stars. And if you can even go further and make this file private set so that it's not writable anymore from any kind of file. So you have to use the modifier that you just created. And now this feels like more SwiftUI. And the benefit of environment that is underneath allow you to provide the same thing for multiple view because of the way the environment work. I want to emphasize that when you are building a component, you shouldn't hesitate to put any optional behavior inside a view modifier. It helps you creating more capable components that you can reuse across your app with a simple version and a more advanced version afterward. So now you have seen how to put data inside of our view. How do we get data out of our view? So the first approach would be to use a binding. Binding is basically a read-write argument. You can read and write on it, and it will make this component to behave like a control. Like the view itself can change the value, and you will get it out. Since you are building a control now, you should be a good citizen and actually support SwiftUI built-in environment modifiers like control size, disable it. This will make your view feel right at home alongside the real SwiftUI API built by Apple. And those are just readable like your one with still the at environment. But What about read-only output? Let's say that this component gets the number of the rating, we don't know wherever it gets it, and you are just interested of getting it out from the component. In here, binding won't work anymore because you can mess up with binding. Any developer could just write whatever value you want inside of your view and it will not work. So for this kind of way, I would propose like maybe use some kind of callback with the actual rating. And from inside the component, you can call the callback providing the value and you get the data out. Impossible to get the data in. But this is still not perfect because the way Swift works means that you can also write this like that. And now it's confusing for the developer, like what exactly is this callback does. So it's better to build a modifier callback that will actually keep the name with it. So to build that, it's a little bit trickier than the environment because first you need a type alias for readability with the actual callback you need, and then you know already that you're going to have an extension on your view with your special method. We can try to implement that with environment. So maybe we can just store the callback inside the environment and call it with the environment value. But the problem with that is that if you decide to put more than one modifier, you will actually end up in a dead end because environment will actually provide the environment to the child by creating some kind of hidden view that just does that. And because of that, the second one will actually set on the first one that will actually override the value. So you will only get the first one to be called in the end. So another way of thinking it would be to use another SwiftUI mechanism that is called preference. Preference works the other way around. You provide a data that you want to get out along the parents, and you can just listen for change for it. It's a little bit more code, so we are going to go fast on it. Therefore, the code doesn't matter, like Daniel Selbert would say, only the concept does. So go back to the modifier which we were just in. We would use on preference change with a preference key and deal with the value. And the preference key is two methods. One is a default value that I put to nil because, well, I don't have a default value for that, and a reducer that will decide which value will override another. So with that, you can then provide the preference value using the modifier inside of your component. And now we have a callback modifier that actually triggers anytime you want outside of your view. So let's try to use it. This is focusing on actual usage of your API. So we are going to have a simple view starting to change, monitor the change, and we are going to store that change inside of a state variable to be able to print it within a text. Why not? So that works, but it doesn't feel quite right to introduce a state in the view to consume it here. So we can do better. So let's try to do a rating reader, something that behaves just like geometry reader or things like that in SwiftUI. I call it the provider. So to build a rating reader, what you need is creating a whole new view, and the content of that view, because it's a container, will be defined at compile time. You define this callback so that you can call it, and then you have the rating, the famous state rating will be hidden here, and you will use that as an input to get your actual view. Once you have that, you just call on rating change if you have it, or maybe on preference change directly. And you can now use rating reader. It feels more SwiftUI as ever. How does it work? It works because rating reader will add some kind of preference reader inside of hierarchy. Rating star will provide the value to the reader that will provide it to the callback that will actually provide it to the text. So keep track of your data and you will see it works. So my advice, you should examine the call sites of the view and try to simplify them as much as possible. Have a look at all the tools available with SwiftUI Parameters on callback, they are just the small part of the iceberg, but go with environment preference and binding provider to simplify inputs and outputs. And most important of all, try to reproduce what you have seen from Apple SwiftUI patterns. Merci beaucoup.
So I wanted to ask you a bunch of different things. One thing that you talked about at the beginning was putting together a button kit.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's always a little bit hard when you're trying to make something like that is like, how do you figure out what feels like the most idiomatic Swift to you? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think that's basically what I said is that you should, when you're trying to build something for as most people as possible, you should really try to use it in very strange ways to see if it works, if you can actually take the thing upside down and build complex things out of it. Like what was really hard to build with ButtonKit was the deterministic progress because it needed to be very flexible, and I really wanted that you should be able to provide whatever kind of progress you want to provide, as well as any time of asynchronous or loading style you want. And so I put myself with a challenge. Can I build the download app button from the Apple Store with ButtonKit? Matter of fact, you can, and it feels correct. So for me, it's enough. Like as long as it wasn't working and it wasn't feeling right to my eyes, I was like, okay, let's keep it trading.
Cool, awesome. I'm gonna have to give my phone to Josh because his is being
I have 0
very
internet now. My phone is done. All right. My first time reading these. What about modifiers discoverability? That's a question, not a statement.
Yeah, so modifier, they're a pattern that is often misunderstood. The way I see modifiers is that indeed you cannot discover them very easily, but maybe that's also the point of not having everything at the specific call site directly. uh, Ask yourself, what does matter the most to my component? What is the minimal viable thing that my view actually require? And for optional argument, I would say ask yourself what kind of parameter would not make sense to be packed in for multiple subsets of view, like button with the role. Optional argument makes pretty much sense. So yeah, but it comes with the drawback of you need to have documentation or know them. But there is no perfect word, I guess.
All right. Next question. For your this one is tough for my stutter. For your rating reader, is a binding simpler?
Well, in that case, a binding would have been simpler, but remember that a binding provides you with the with the right responsibility. And I specifically said that in my case, I was interested in an example where developer providing a new rating would make no sense at all. Like the component make its own value. So putting that inside of rating stars wasn't the best choice maybe, but I couldn't figure an example that would work all along, and I didn't want to switch example in the middle. But with ButtonKit, I have something that provides you with the task that is going on at a moment, like what task is actually performing, the button is actually performing, so that you can cancel it maybe. And so this is in a callback in modifier because I don't want to have an optional argument for that, and it's an output only because you don't bring your own task.
And then one more question. What if you have to track several parameters? Do you end up creating a struct with corresponding state variables?
Yeah, sure. Like you can see, Geometry Reader, they provide you with a struct that contains a lot of things, and you can even provide methods. Like Scroll View Reader will provide you with method that you can actually call. And regarding preferences as well, you can still put a struct inside of your preferences. If you need to keep track of multiple version of the same value because maybe you want to keep track of all your buttons inside of your hierarchy, you can also put some kind of identifier to know which value of which button it is. So I'm talking about button, but it could be whatever you can imagine anyway.
Cool. Well, Tomas, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tomas, everybody.